Well, Cuto and Rhea turned to each other in shock, and Rhea's eyes widened, and she whispered, do you think she fell off the cliff?" And Cuto said, "I don't know. Uh, I don't know where else she could have gone." And just at that moment, a giggle sounded from down the cliff, and they both looked, and the cliff sloped away first. It sloped away for a few feet and then went straight down. And they looked out, and down as far as they dared to edge out and couldn't see anything. And Rhea said, "Swallow?" And there was a laugh. Voice came up, "Yep, I'm down here." "How did you get down there?" She said, "Look," Swallow's voice said, "look at your feet. Look a little bit uh, in front of your feet down the rock, and you'll see two grooves cut in the rock. And you should see a pair of grooves just about 2, 3 feet below them, cut in the rock." And Cuto said, "Yeah, we see them." And she said, "All right. Now, what you have to do is you have to put as you're looking at them, there's a grooves on the left and grooves on the right. If you turn around and face the rock, the grooves will be on your right and on your left in reverse. So what you need to do is turn around, face the rock, and put your left foot and your left hand in the grooves on the right, not on the left. Ignore the grooves to your left as you're facing the rock." She said, "If you'll, that'll give you a handhold." Then she said, "If you'll slide your um, left foot down, you will find another groove down the rock. And if you slide your right foot down, holding on with your left hand, you will find a groove for your right foot. And then you move down and you will find grooves for your feet and hands right in good spacing down the rock, and it creates kind of a ladder." And Kuta said, "Why can't we start with a hand on the left and a hand on the right and a foot on the left and a foot on the right?" Right. And Swallow said, "It's a trap. And I'll explain it to you later. You got to start this way, um, or it's not going to work." So Kuto looked at Rhea and he said, "Well, all right, I'll go." So he took off his sandals, tied them together around his neck, and so he had bare feet. And he turned around, faced the rock, and moved so that his left hand and his left foot were in the grooves. And he found the grooves were about 2 to 3 inches deep. That is, cut into the rock, and about 6 inches wide. They were very well cut to accommodate his hand and his feet. So he did. And then he slid his right foot down, and sure enough, not too far down, but hidden by the curve of the rock, was a groove for his right foot. And he slid his left foot down, and there was a groove for his left foot. And so he started moving down the face of the rock. And just as Swallow had said, there were grooves perfectly placed for his feet and hands to go down, just like a ladder. Well, he was looking down between his legs to spot the next groove instead of feeling with his feet. And as he got past the bend in the rock, he was looking straight down 300 feet to a pile of rocks at the bottom of the cliff. And he froze. It was really scary. He froze. And Swallow's very calm voice came up to him and said, "Don't look down. Look straight ahead at the rock right in front of you. Don't look down." And so he raised his eyes until he was looking straight ahead at the rock, about a foot away from his face. And gradually he got calmer. looking straight ahead. And he started moving his feet down and his hands down. And Swallow's voice came up, perfect. Just keep coming down. Take your time and just make sure you don't look down. So he did. Started down and he got 50 or 60 feet down the rock and he looked up and here comes Rhea behind him. Now she'd heard all the instructions, so she never looked down. She was looking straight ahead at the rock in front of her, and which is exactly what you do in a rock climbing situation like that. And she was coming down quite smoothly. So he went on down, gaining confidence, and in a few minutes, about 100 feet down, he found Swallow's voice was all of a sudden right beside him, and he looked to his right, and there was a ledge 3 feet wide, a wide ledge to the side of the handholds and footholds. And he stepped over on the ledge, and Swallow was there. And she smiled at him and she said, when you froze, she said, I thought to myself, I finally figured out, I finally have something harder for him to do than for me to use the sling. And I feel really good about that. So he gave her a smile, and pretty soon Rhea joined them, and they walked along the ledge to the right and came around a little corner, and there was an enormous cave, a big hollowed out place in the cliff. And it was probably, 60 feet high and 100 feet deep. No, I'd say 40 feet deep and 100 feet across, a third of a football field across. And in it were structures, 3 levels of structures with doors and windows, just like the structures built at the Pueblo. And of course, it was a cliff dwelling. And they could see ladders, old ladders, reaching up from the bottom level to the second level to the third level, just the way they did in the Pueblo Indians' Pueblo. And Cuto said, who built this? And Swallow said, the ancients built it. And he said, how many stairs, cuts in the rock are there down from the top, from the desert level, the desert floor? She said 2, 1 on each side. And he said, how many, do they go all the way to the bottom, to the valley floor? And she said, there's 4 sets of cuts in the stone down to the valley floor, because the ancients farmed down in the valley. You can see the stream down there, and if you walk down there, you'll find evidences of where they had gardens. And she said, my father found this many, 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 many years ago hunting in the desert. And it took him a while to figure out the handholds and footholds, but he finally figured it out and got down here. And at that time, the Comanche had started to raid the Pueblo a lot. And he decided that he would bring the whole Pueblo to this cliff dwelling to hide from the Comanches. But before they had to do that, the Comanche raids eased off, and they only raided occasionally, one of which captured me 2 years ago, but they haven't raided steadily ever since. So he's never moved the tribe into this cliff dwelling, but it's always here. So she showed them 2 pretty new ladders that her dad had made, and they went up to the first level, and then the second one went up to the ladders went from first level to second level, and then second level to third level. And on the third level, they found a room that he had cleaned out, and there was a very clever fireplace in one corner of the room at the back, fresh wood, and they got their provisions from the sacks they were carrying and built a fire and had a very comfortable evening and spent the night in the cliff dwelling. And the next day, they went out, climbed back up the cuts in the cliff, up the handholds and footholds, and of course this time, knowing how to do it, they went up quite quickly, and both Rhea and Cuto kept their eyes on the rock right in front of them, and Swallow went up like an insect, just shot up there like an ant. They weren't quite as fast, but they were a lot more comfortable than they had been the day before. So they went back to the Pueblo. A month later, Cuto decided he needed to have another look at the horses in Santa Fe. So without saying anything to anyone, he took off one morning and walked into Santa Fe. He got to the square, and the traders were in the square, but he didn't go into the square. He went around the building out to the back, and there he found some wooden fencing and a pasture with a stream running through it, and about 30 conquistador horses. And he was fascinated by the horses, absolutely fascinated. And he stood, and there were 8 conquistadors standing separated, standing along the fence, kind of guarding the horses. And so he stopped quite a distance away from the fence and started studying the horses. And he kept thinking back to Adzul, what Adzul had told him about how mounted men in both the Aztec and the Inca empires had been able to defeat the warriors on foot quite easily with horses. And he just was fascinated by these horses. They were bigger than he thought they would be. And he kept watching him and unconsciously moved closer to the fence until, without realizing it, he was about 10 feet away from the fence. And all of a sudden, he felt a heavy blow on his shoulder, and a soldier grabbed his shoulder and yanked him backwards. Without thinking, he pivoted on one foot, jammed his hand up under the soldier's jaw, and pushed him backwards, threw him to the ground. And before he could do anything, another soldier knocked him to the ground, and the other ones came over and they beat and pummeled and kicked him until he was almost unconscious, covered with blows. His head was bloody from blows with their sword butts. They put a rope around his neck and dragged him back to the square, yelling and shouting at him. And he, of course, didn't understand, but they were yelling, and they dragged him into the square to the front of where all the traders sat. And they started yelling at the traders that in a combination of words, Spanish and Pueblo dialect, that this is what happened to anybody who came close to their horses, and worse would happen to anybody who tried to get close to their horses again. And while they were yelling and screaming, the same man that Feather had warned him about when they first came to the square stood up from a bench by the building and walked across the square towards them. And he wasn't very big, and he, had the mean eyes and the little pointy beard and mustache. And he pulled his sword out. And the man's name was Lieutenant Marquez. And the soldiers backed off when they saw him approaching, and the traders knew this guy was very evil and liked to do nothing than to kill or torture Indians. And he walked up waving the sword in the air, gently waving it. And he was thinking to himself, well, what do I start with the ears? Maybe the nose. Then cut off the nose, cut off the ears, and then I'll go for the eyes. We'll make an example out of this man for no one ever to come near the horses. And he walked up to Cuto, and Cuto could tell that this guy was bad news. And he wished he had the armor shirt. He'd not put on the armor shirt. The medallion was hot under his cloth, under his cotton shirt. And he thought he'd let Adzul down. The guy was going to kill him, and the conquistadors would get the medallion, and he would have failed Adzul and failed Adzul's father's command that they always protect the medallion. And he said, well, to himself, at least I'm going to die. I will not give him any pleasure of crying out or begging for mercy. And he stared the guy right in the eye, stared Marquez right in the eye. And Marquez was furious. There was no fear in this man. And he waved the tip of the sword right, he just stroked Adzul's cheek with it ever so gently. He was going to cut off his nose with it. And a voice said, don't you think this man has been beaten enough for just getting close to the horses, Lieutenant Marquez? And Marquez turned around, and there was a very large man dressed in black, with a black hood and a black robe and a rope belt, and the black robe went all the way down to his sandals. And Marquez said, Father Montoya, I didn't think you were in town. And the man said, I got back this morning. Oh, said Marquez, we didn't think you'd get back until tonight. And he was seething inside because Father Montoya was the most powerful man in Santa Fe. He was way more powerful than the head of the conquistadors, Colonel Rodriguez. Montoya was the single most powerful man because he represented the Church of Spain. He was the single most powerful man in the territory. And Father Montoya said, don't you think we ought to go talk to Colonel Marquez and see what he thinks about this situation? And don't you think we ought to go talk to Colonel Rodriguez? And Marquez put his sword in its sheath and he said, of course, Father Montoya. And they walked into one of the doorways in the building, and a guard led them right into Colonel Rodriguez's office. And Father Montoya explained what was going on, and Rodriguez knew that Marquez had a hatred for the Indians and would kill or torture Indians at the drop of a hat. So Rodriguez, when Montoya explained what had happened, Rodriguez said, yeah, I think he's been punished enough. Here's what I want to do. Lieutenant Marquez, take him and put him in a storeroom on the corner of where the buildings come together in the corner, and hold him there for 3 days. And don't give him any food, but you can give him water. Give him a bucket of water every day for 3 days. And then we'll turn him loose and tell him that if he ever approaches the horses again, there'll be much more severe consequences. And Marquez was enraged. But he said, yes, sir. And he went out and made a big show of taking the rope off of Cuto's neck, a big show of having one of the men lead him gently, easily across the square to the storeroom, opened the storeroom, made a big show of shepherding him inside, having another one of his men go get a bucket of water, bring it to the door, and then he himself took the bucket of water inside the storeroom before he locked the door. And what nobody saw was he kicked the bucket of water over once nobody could see him, and went out and shut the door and locked it. And the next morning, made a big show, bringing a bucket of water into the room, just as he had done the day before, kicking it over when nobody could see him, and locking the door. The night of the night of the second day, Montoya left to go visit another pueblo. And the following morning was the morning that Cuto was supposed to be let loose. And Lieutenant Marquez knew that this was his chance, and he devised a plan. And what he was going to do the next morning was to uh, take Cuto out wrapped in a blanket, big blanket, and make a big show of letting him go outside the city, but he wasn't really going to let him go. He was going to take him out in the desert and torture him to death. But before he took him out in the desert to torture him to death, he had something else he wanted to do. So Cuto was really, really thirsty the night of the second day. He had no water, no food. And he was sitting in the storeroom when the door opened in the middle of the night. And a candle came in, and he recognized the face of Marquez in the candlelight. Now, his ankles and his wrists were tied. So Marquez came over, yanked him up by the ties on his wrists, and lifted him up and hung his wrists by the rope that was tying them together on a big nail that was stuck in the wall, the back wall of the storeroom. And Cuto was dangling there, his toes just barely touching the floor. And then Marquez went back to the candle and rustled around. And Cuto heard a little laugh, and the next thing he felt was this incredible pain as Marquez hit him with a whip with multiple heads, knots on the end of the whip, and it tore the flesh in his back. And he didn't utter a sound. He wasn't going to utter a sound. And that made Marquez furious, and he whipped him as hard as he could across the back and all the way down to behind his knees, time after time after time, until Cuto's back was a mass of blood and he was barely conscious. And finally, Marquez had no strength. He used up all the strength to doing this, and he stopped after about 30 minutes and gave a soft laugh in the darkness, snuffed out the candle, stepped out, and locked the door. Cuto was mostly unconscious, and the hours went by. And then it was maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, there was a scraping on the roof of the storeroom. And bits of stuff started to fall down into the storeroom. And pretty soon a hole was open in the roof of the storeroom. And Swallow's voice came through the hole. Cuto, Cuto, are you down there? No sound. Cuto, are you down there? No sound. And she turned to Feather, who was beside her with a couple of other men on the roof, and she said, "This is the storeroom that the traders reported he was being held in. It's got to be the right storeroom. Lower me down, and I'll see if I can find him. Something's wrong." So they lowered Swallow down on a rope, and she called his name, and again inside the storeroom, and there was just a little bit of a groan, and she felt her way through the dark and felt him and smelled the blood. And when she touched him, he groaned again, and she went back up under the hole and said, "Father, you got to come down. He's been badly wounded. He's hung somehow on a wall. I can't move him." And so they enlarged the hole, and the men, 2 of whom were Aztecs and the others were Indians, lowered Feather down, and he found his way through the dark and figured out what had happened. And they lowered some more leather thongs and wrapped them around under Cuto's arms across his back and started to pull him out. And of course, the pain on his back was so bad from the leather rope that he passed out, which was a good thing. And they hauled him up through the hole onto the roof, hauled up Feather and Swallow, and two of the men got Cuto. Two of the Aztecs got him immediately when he was out of the hole up on the roof. Put him up. One of them put him over his shoulder, went to the edge of the roof to the back of the square. This is on because the storeroom went to the back of the square. They lowered him down where Rhea, two other Aztecs, and some Indians were, and one of the Aztecs immediately they lowered him down. Then one of the Aztecs picked him up in a fireman's carry with Cuto over his shoulder and started out of town with the other Indians and Rhea. She could feel the wounds, and she was very upset. And they took off immediately. Feather and Swallow, to get pulled out, they took off immediately and headed home. And in 15 minutes, they were all gone. They were gone out of Santa Fe in 15 minutes. Now remember, Santa Fe was a tiny, tiny community. They were gone, and on their way back to the Pueblo. Well, the next thing Cuto knew, he woke up, and he was lying on his stomach on blankets, and the pain. He had bandages on, and the pain was just incredible. And Swallow's voice came right to him, "Don't move, don't move." And Rhea's voice came from the other side of his head, "Don't move. You've been badly injured, and we've been treating your back." Swallow said, "My mother and Rhea have been putting honey and poultices, which are herbs and medicines from plants, on your back, but don't move." And he managed to say, "How did you find me?" And Swallow said, "Word came from the traders that they knew you were supposed to be in that room 3 days, but word came that Father Montoya had left Santa Fe, and they were scared to leave you for Marquez to take you out. They didn't think you'd survive with Montoya gone, Father Montoya gone. So we decided we had to rescue you before the third day when you were supposed to be released." And that's how he had come to be rescued. So he said, the medallion, did they get the medallion? And Rhea said, no. They never found the medallion. Marquez never found the medallion. It's around your neck. And he passed out again. It took him a number more days before he could move around. And then he really spent most of the time sitting or lying outside the room on the third level in the sun, lying on his side because his back and rear end and legs were so badly whipped, talking to Feather and talking to his man and just healing. 4 weeks after he'd been rescued, he was able to move around and go up and down the ladders and engage in some normal activity. And one day, the traders returned and said, "The conquistadors have found out where you are, and they're sending a raiding party to get you tomorrow morning." And that is the end of the story for now. Now, if you If you don't know what happens and you want to try something, try writing what you think's going to happen on the attack of the conquistadors. And then in the next episode, we'll find out what happens in the book. Good luck.